The dust of the Atacama was less like sand and more like a fine red-brown powder that clung to everything. It coated the environmental suits of the excavation team, muted the white gleam of their prefab shelters, and filmed the thick polycarbonate windows of the mobile lab. Inside, shielded from the crushing sun and the sterile emptiness of the desert, the air tasted of chilled, recycled oxygen. Edward stood over the object, his hands clasped behind his back, a familiar posture of deep concentration. It rested on a reinforced titanium pedestal in the center of the cleanroom, bathed in the cool, shadowless light of overhead panels. It was about the size of a human torso, a block of material that seemed to drink the light, refusing to reflect it. It wasn't black, but a complex, layered lattice of dark violet and indigo that shifted as you moved, giving the illusion of immense depth. Its surface was unnervingly smooth, broken by seams that were too perfect, too precise to be the result of any geological process. They had found it 40 meters down, embedded in a layer of rock dated at over 50,000 years old, encased in a compressed shell of melted earth that suggested a high-velocity impact. But the object itself was pristine. Initial mass spectrometry is inconclusive, a technician's voice announced over the intercom, tinny and distant. The elemental composition doesn't match anything on the periodic table. We're seeing isotopes that shouldn't be stable. Edward didn't reply. He leaned closer, his breath fogging a small patch on the containment field separating him from the artifact. He pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose, his gaze tracing one of the impossibly fine seams. It wasn't a meteor. It wasn't a geological anomaly. It was made, manufactured. The quiet certainty of it settled in his gut like a cold stone. He had spent his life studying the theoretical markings and linguistic structures of undiscovered alien cultures. It had always been a game of academic hypotheticals, of deciphering symbols on distant probes or analyzing signal fragments from the void. This was different. This was real. The cleanroom door hissed open, and Dr. Elara Vance entered. She moved with an economy of motion that spoke of her years in military field science, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that allowed no stray strands. She held a data slate, her expression unreadable as she came to a stop beside him. "The ground-penetrating radar scans are finalized," she said, her voice calm and even, a counterpoint to the thrumming energy in the room. "There's no other debris. Whatever this was, it came in alone. The impact crater was vitrified, then eroded over the millennia. This is all that's left." "It's a recorder," Edward said, his voice barely a whisper. He couldn't take his eyes off it. "It has to be. A flight recorder. A ship's log." "We've been calling it the artifact," Elara noted, her eyes on the object, "but you're already giving it a function." "Look at the geometry," he urged, gesturing with a gloved hand. "The seams aren't decorative, they're access points. The entire structure is designed for data survivability in a catastrophic failure. It's a black box, Elara." She considered his words, her pragmatism warring with the sheer strangeness of the situation. A black box from what? From who? "That," Edward said, a slow smile spreading across his face, the academic thrill momentarily overriding the crushing weight of the discovery, "is what we're going to find out." He turned from the artifact to face her, the intensity in his eyes almost manic. "Get the interface probes ready. I don't care what the composition is. I want to know what's inside. I want to hear the story." Elara met his gaze, and for a moment the sterile silence of the lab felt like the calm before a storm. She gave a single decisive nod. "I'll make the call." As she turned to leave, Edward looked back at the violet-black block on its pedestal. It had waited 50,000 years in the dark, silent belly of the earth, a silent witness. He felt a profound sense of destiny, a feeling that he was standing on the precipice of a revelation that would change not just his life, but everything. He had no idea how right he was. The transfer from the Atacama site to the main research facility at White Sands was a high-security affair shrouded in layers of official secrecy. The artifact, now designated Specimen 734, was housed in a subterranean lab, a concrete bunker designed to withstand a direct nuclear strike. Here, the air didn't just taste recycled. It felt heavy, pressurized. Edward and Elara were the designated leads, granted supreme authority over the project, and the weight of that responsibility was a physical presence in the room. For 3 weeks, they made no progress. The artifact resisted every non-invasive scanning technique they had. It absorbed energy, deflected signals, and remained stubbornly inert. Its seams were too fine for any physical tool to exploit without risking damage to the internal structure. Finally, Edward convinced the Oversight Committee to approve his more radical plan. They were going to treat the seams not as mechanical junctions, but as data ports. He stood at a holographic control panel, Elara at a bioscanner terminal beside him. Micromolecular probes, guided by magnetic fields and quantum tunneling resonators, hovered centimeters from the artifact's surface. "Initiating Phase 1, Edward said, his voice tight. "Bring probe Alpha to the primary intersection." He manipulated the holographic controls, and one of the tiny probes drifted slowly towards a point where 3 seams met. "We're not cutting, we're knocking." "Resonance frequency is cycling," Elara reported, her eyes fixed on her screen. "We're looking for a sympathetic vibration, something that tells us the material is designed to respond." For hours, there was nothing. The probes sent out frequencies from the subsonic to the terahertz range. The artifact remained silent, a violet-black enigma. The control room was filled with the low hum of machinery and the soft tapping of technicians at their stations. Edward began to pace, a caged energy building within him as he walked the perimeter of the central command platform. He pushed his glasses up, ran a hand through his hair, and stared at the artifact as if trying to solve the puzzle through sheer force of will. "Try a chaotic pulse," he said suddenly, stopping his pacing. "Not a pattern, just noise, a burst of raw data." Elara looked up from her console. "A digital sledgehammer? The protocol is designed for technology, we understand," he finished for her. "This is different. Maybe it's not waiting for a key. Maybe it's waiting for a jolt, a sudden unstructured energy spike to wake it up." She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then her fingers flew across her console. "Channeling raw static through the probe array. Full spectrum burst on your mark." "Mark." A low thrum filled the room. The lights flickered. On the main screen, a violent spike of energy erupted from the probe and washed over the artifact. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a soft chime, pure and melodic, echoed through the lab. It was the first sound the object had ever made. The seams on its surface glowed with a soft white light, tracing intricate patterns across the dark exterior. "We have a response," a technician yelled, his voice cracking with excitement. "Data flow it's a deluge. I can't even quantify it. Terabytes per second." "Quarantine it," Elara commanded, her voice sharp and authoritative. "Route it to the isolated servers. Don't let a single byte touch the main network." The screens in the lab, once showing orderly columns of data, were now filled with a chaotic storm of information. It was a raw sensory feed, unfiltered and overwhelming. Flashes of unearthly landscapes, foliage in colors the human eye was not meant to see. Bursts of sound, a high-pitched, chittering language mixed with the whine of unknown machinery and what sounded like breathing. Frantic, terrified breathing. Edward stared mesmerized at the main view screen. A distorted visual swam into focus for a few seconds. It was a first-person perspective, looking down at 2 long, 3-fingered hands, a pale gray in color, holding a device that pulsed with a soft green light. The background was a blur of immense dark green leaves and thick, twisted vines. "What is that?" Elara whispered, coming to stand beside him. "A memory," Edward said, his voice filled with awe. "The first page of the story." The visual shuddered, then fractured into a kaleidoscope of light and color. The audio feed crackled with a burst of the chittering language, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a scream, pure, undiluted panic. Then, silence. The data stream stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The lights on the artifact faded, and it once again became a silent, brooding enigma. Edward pushed his glasses up his nose, his heart pounding in his chest. "Get the translation algorithms running on that audio file," he ordered, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands, "and start assembling the visual fragments, every single one. I want to see what they saw." The translation took another 2 weeks. The alien language was complex, with a multi-tonal structure that conveyed emotional state as much as literal meaning. Edward worked feverishly, cross-referencing audio fragments with visual cues, building a rudimentary lexicon. He lived on stale coffee and the sheer obsessive drive to understand. Elara, meanwhile, focused on the environmental data embedded in the recordings: atmospheric composition, gravity readings, radiation levels. "They match Earth," she said one afternoon, startling Edward from his concentration. He looked up from his workstation, his eyes red-rimmed. "The readings are all within terrestrial norms: high humidity, dense nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere, 1G gravity. Wherever this was recorded, it was here." "I know," Edward said softly. He turned his screen towards her. He had pieced together the first coherent log file. It was labeled, according to his best translation, Ecological Survey, Sector Gamma 9, Continent 3. "Play it," she said. He tapped a control, and the main screen in their private briefing room flickered to life. The view was stabilized now, a clear, high-definition recording from the perspective of one of the aliens. The camera panned across a breathtakingly dense jungle. Giant trees formed a canopy so thick that the light filtering through was a dim green twilight. The air was visibly thick with moisture, and the sounds were a symphony of insect calls, unseen animal cries, and the soft squelch of boots on damp earth. "The biodiversity is beyond all projections," a translated voice spoke, the text scrolling at the bottom of the screen. The original alien audio played alongside it, a calm, melodic series of clicks and whistles. "Life competes for every surface. The energy density is remarkable." Two other aliens moved into frame. They were tall and slender, perhaps 7 feet in height, their bodies encased in sleek, form-fitting silver suits. They moved with a slow, deliberate grace, their 3-fingered hands holding sophisticated scanning devices that swept over the flora. Their heads were large and teardrop-shaped, with wide, dark eyes that took in everything with placid curiosity. "The dominant flora exhibits a cellulose structure of extreme complexity," a second voice added. "The potential for new biomaterials is significant." The one whose perspective they shared, the narrator, crouched down, its hand reaching for a large, iridescent beetle crawling on a leaf. Even the invertebrates display advanced metallic carapaces. This world is a biological treasure. They spent what the log's timestamp indicated was several hours conducting their survey, their commentary a calm, scientific cataloging of a new world. They were scientists, explorers, filled with a sense of wonder. Then the tone shifted. The narrator froze. The camera whipped to the side. In the dense undergrowth, something had moved. 2 points of yellow-green light glinted in the gloom. "Did you detect that?" "Unidentified biological." "Negative analysis. My scanner shows nothing of significant mass," the second voice replied, a hint of electronic uncertainty in its tone. The first alien took a step back. The breathing sounds, once calm and regular, became faster. The 2 points of light in the darkness did not move. They simply watched. "It is observing us. Its energy signature is masked, a predator." The word predator was a new one. Edward had to extrapolate its meaning from the tonal shift in the alien's voice, a sudden spike of fear and aggression. It was a concept they understood, but not one they seemed prepared for. The second alien raised its scanner, which emitted a low hum. "Its cellular density is immense. This is not possible. It is just flesh and bone." Suddenly, the undergrowth exploded. A blur of black and gold muscle launched itself from the shadows. There was no roar, just a terrifying silence as the creature moved. It was a leopard, sleek and impossibly fast. It collided with the second alien, and the camera feed spun wildly as the narrator fell back. There was a sickening crunch of metal and bone, a high-pitched scream of agony and terror from the attacked alien. The camera focused again, shakily, on the scene. The leopard had the alien's torso in its jaws, its powerful neck shaking the 7-foot body as if it were a doll. The silver suit was shredded, and dark, violet-hued blood stained the jungle floor. The sophisticated scanner lay broken nearby. "Tariff! It is eating him!" the narrator shrieked. It scrambled backwards, fumbling for a device on its hip, a small cylindrical object. It raised it, and a beam of brilliant white light shot out, striking the leopard on its flank. The cat yowled in pain and surprise, dropping its victim and vanishing back into the trees. The log ended there. The only remaining audio was the narrator's ragged, panicked breathing, a sound of pure, unadulterated horror that needed no translation. In the silence of the briefing room, Edward slowly took off his glasses and cleaned them with a cloth. Elara stared at the frozen image of the mauled alien, her face pale. "A leopard," she whispered. "They were taken out by a common leopard." She turned to Edward, her eyes wide with a dawning, terrible realization. "They have energy weapons, advanced bioscanners, and they were surprised." "They were scientists," Edward corrected softly. "Not soldiers. They came here to study a paradise. They had no idea they'd walked into a war zone." The decryption process became an obsession, a descent into a 50,000-year-old nightmare. Log file by log file, Edward and Elara pieced together the story of the doomed expedition. After the leopard attack, the survivors had regrouped, their tones shifting from scientific curiosity to cautious paranoia. They abandoned the Congo Basin, which their logs now referred to as the Zone of Hyperaggression, and relocated their survey to a different continent, South America. The next complete log file they unlocked was from a scout operating alone in what was clearly the Amazon rainforest. The visuals were just as stunning, but the narrator's voice was tense, nervous. "Solo reconnaissance, Sector Delta 4. The life forms here are smaller, but the biocomplexity remains high. I am maintaining Level 3 threat awareness." The camera panned across the forest floor, lingering on colorful insects and strange fungi. The alien scout seemed particularly fascinated by the frogs. It zoomed in on a tiny, brilliant yellow amphibian sitting motionless on a leaf. Another specimen of extreme aposematism. The coloration is a clear warning signal, yet my passive scans detect no external venom delivery system. It is a biological contradiction. Driven by a scientific curiosity that overrode his caution, the alien reached out a long gray finger and gently prodded the frog's back. The frog did not move. The alien retracted its hand, the camera focusing on its fingertip. A faint, oily sheen coated the silver material of its glove. Analysis contamination, a contact toxin. Fascinating. The delivery system is the skin itself, a passive defense mechanism of incredible efficiency. I am collecting a sample for... The sentence was never finished. The alien's voice choked. A shudder ran through its body, so violent the camera feed blurred. A low, wet gasp echoed in the recording. Toxin breached containment. Unscheduled protein cascade. The camera fell, hitting the forest floor with a thud. The view was now of the canopy, far above. The only sounds were the alien's ragged, gasping breaths, which grew shallower and shallower, punctuated by wet, gurgling noises. Then a final, faint sigh. And silence. The log's life sign monitor, visible in the corner of the display, flatlined. Edward muted the audio. The silence in the briefing room was absolute. "Poison dart frog," Elara stated, her voice a flat, clinical monotone. She was looking at a holographic display of the amphibian, cross-referencing it with an Earth biology database. "Batrachotoxin, one of the most potent neurotoxins found in nature, causes paralysis, muscle convulsions, and cardiac arrest." She looked at Edward. "Their suits were designed for radiation and vacuum, not for complex organic compounds. The toxin must have passed right through the glove's material at a molecular level." Edward felt a chill that had nothing to do with the lab's air conditioning. "They had no concept of it," he said. "To them, a weapon is a tool, a piece of technology. The idea of a living creature being a weapon, of its very skin being a delivery system, it was alien to them. This, they thought, was the crux of the horror. That Earth's life was not just competitive, but ingeniously passively lethal in ways the visitors could not predict. They were wrong. The true revelation, the twist that turned the story from a tragedy into a galactic horror story, came when they finally decrypted the secured logs of the expedition's medical officer. These logs weren't visual. They were stark, clinical data streams, autopsy reports, cellular analysis, and frantic, desperate notes. The first entry was on the scout killed by the frog. The medical officer's analysis was filled with baffled terminology. He couldn't understand how a simple protein could so completely dismantle his crewmate's advanced physiology. But the scout wasn't the only casualty. The logs detailed 4 other deaths, none of them from predators or toxins. The descriptions were terrifying. Patient, Scout Terrell. Symptom, dermal necrosis originating from minor laceration. Result: catastrophic systemic infection, cellular dissolution. Autopsy reveals hostile monocellular organisms of unknown classification. Our antibiotics are inert. Patient pilot Vnax. Symptom: sudden onset of pulmonary failure after water ingestion. Result: liquefaction of respiratory tissues. Cause: a parasitic amoebic life form that consumes cells from within. Our antiparasitics have no effect. One by one, the medical officer chronicled the agonizing deaths of his crewmates from invisible assailants. He recorded their fevers, their delirium, their bodies breaking down at a cellular level. His notes grew more and more frantic. Their biology is a weapon, not just the megafauna, not just the toxins. It is the world itself. The very air, the water, the soil, it is saturated with microorganisms that are hyper-aggressive, pathologically hostile. They treat our cells not as foreign bodies, but as a food source. We have no defense. We cannot build a defense. Their evolution is predicated on a constant microscopic war, a war we are not equipped to fight. Elara stood motionless, staring at the translated text. Minor laceration, she whispered. She pulled up a file. Staphylococcus aureus, common skin bacteria, the waterborne amoeba, Naegleria fowleri, the brain-eating amoeba. She looked at Edward, her professional calm finally cracking, revealing the raw shock beneath. They weren't just killed by the planet's predators, they were killed by the planet's common germs. The medical log became the central focus of their investigation. It was a document of pure scientific horror, a testament to a technologically advanced species confronting a form of warfare for which they had no name. Edward handled the linguistic nuances of the medical officer's increasingly desperate entries, while Elara provided the stark, terrifying context. She projected a 3D model of a Staphylococcus bacterium into the center of the room. It was a simple sphere, an unremarkable organism that lived on the skin of nearly every human being on the planet. To us, this is a nuisance, she explained, her voice low and steady as she regained her clinical composure. She gestured to the floating model. It can cause minor infections, easily treated with a basic course of antibiotics. Our immune systems have been fighting it, co-evolving with it, for millions of years. It's part of our internal landscape. She then pulled up the alien medical officer's notes on the screen. He had managed to isolate and analyze the microbe from the dying crew member. His report was a litany of disbelief. Analysis: microbe alpha. It exhibits no recognizable motive force, yet it replicates at an exponential rate within the host's tissues. It produces enzymes that actively dismantle our cellular membranes. It is not just an organism, it is a microscopic engine of decay. All attempts at sterilization have failed. It adapts. It develops resistance to our most potent cytocidal agents within a single replication cycle. He's describing rapid evolution, Elara said, the same process that leads to antibiotic resistance on Earth, but he's seeing it happen in hours, not months or years. Their biology is so foreign, so sterile, that our bacteria treated their cells like an all-you-can-eat buffet with no security guards. Their immune system didn't just fail to recognize the threat, it had no concept of it. Edward paced the briefing room, his mind reeling. He imagined the scene, an alien, a being who could cross interstellar space, dying in agony from a simple infection caused by a scrape from a thorn bush. The sheer asymmetry of it was staggering. They moved on to the next case, the pilot who had drunk from a stream. Elara brought up a model of the amoeba, Naegleria fowleri. This one is rarer, but we know it, she said grimly. Lives in warm freshwater. If it enters the body through the nose, it travels to the brain and begins to consume neural tissue. It's almost always fatal, even with modern human medicine. We combat it with public health warnings. Don't get untreated lake water up your nose. It's a matter of behavior, of learned experience. The alien medical officer's log was even more horrified by this creature. Analysis: parasite. It is a single cell, yet it exhibits predatory behavior. It hunts. It moves with purpose towards the host's neural ganglia. It does not infect. It devours. This is not a disease. It is a microscopic monster. How can a world evolve such things? What kind of evolutionary pressures create life that is, by its very nature, a weapon of such exquisite cruelty? He can't understand it, Edward murmured, stopping his pacing to stare at the screen. He's looking for malice, for intent. He can't accept that this is just nature, competition. He comes from a place where the environment is either controlled or benign. He has no framework for a world where life itself is a bloody, desperate, unending struggle for survival at every single level, from the macroscopic to the microscopic. The log continued, detailing the expedition's collapse. 2 more crew members fell ill, not from any specific exposure, but simply from breathing the air. Elara identified the likely culprits from the symptoms described: a virulent strain of influenza and a fungal spore that caused a massive allergic reaction, filling their lungs with fluid. Things that a healthy human would fight off in a week were, for the aliens, an inescapable death sentence. The final entry from the medical officer was not a report. It was a philosophical treatise, a document of pure terror. Final conclusion. We were wrong. We came here seeking to catalog new life. We have found a world that is itself a living weapon. The dominant species of this planet, the bipedal primates we have observed from a distance, are not merely inhabitants. They are survivors. They are the children of this crucible. Their bodies are not sterile vessels. They are ecosystems, teeming with the very microscopic killers that have destroyed us. They are not just immune to their world, they are one with it. To invade this planet would be madness. You cannot conquer an enemy you cannot see, an enemy that is in the very air you breathe and the water you drink. To the Council I say this: erase the star charts. Declare this sector a void. There is nothing for us here but death, delivered by a billion different hands, none of them larger than a speck of dust. The log ended. The medical officer, the log noted, had self-euthanized after contracting the same bacterial infection that killed his crewmate. Elara switched off the displays, plunging the room into semi-darkness, the only light coming from the glowing console screens. "They didn't stand a chance," she said softly. "They could handle a leopard, they could analyze a toxin, but they couldn't fight a cold." With the medical horror laid bare, Edward and Elara turned to the remaining logs, the personal recordings of the last few survivors. The scientific detachment was gone, replaced by a creeping, superstitious dread. The aliens, stripped of their technological confidence and biological superiority, reverted to a more primitive state of mind. They began to see malice where there was only natural process. They unlocked the log of the expedition's engineer, recorded a week after the medical officer's death. He was holed up in their primary landing craft, attempting to repair the damage from a bird strike that had occurred during their descent. The air recyclers are failing. A growth has appeared on the filtration membranes. It is a fibrous gray mat that expands by the hour. The camera feed showed a close-up of a ventilation grate covered in what was unmistakably common mold. I have tried to burn it, to scrape it away. It returns, more aggressive each time. It is the planet. It has found a way inside our ship. It is growing into the vessel's lungs, trying to choke us. Elara cross-referenced the image. "Aspergillus," she said quietly, "a common mold fungus. Its spores are everywhere. In a sealed, high-humidity environment, like their ship, it would grow like crazy. Our systems have scrubbers and fungicides designed specifically to handle it." The alien engineer, however, saw it as a deliberate, intelligent assault. His log continued, his voice growing more and more paranoid. "The noises at night. A scratching on the hull. The scans show nothing but small, nocturnal mammals. But I know it is the world spirit, testing our defenses, seeking entry. The rain that falls is acidic. It is slowly eating away at the landing struts. The very ground conspires against us." Edward listened, a sense of profound pity welling up inside him. "He's anthropomorphizing the entire planet," he said. He can't accept the reality that he's in an environment where everything is simply more aggressive, more competitive, more corrosive. So he's invented a villain. It's easier to be at war with a sentient monster than to accept that you're simply fundamentally out of your element. The most chilling log came from the last survivor but one, a xenobotanist who had barricaded herself inside a small prefabricated survey tent. Her video log was shaky, her wide, dark eyes darting back and forth, looking at shadows that weren't there. Her silver suit was grimy, her breathing shallow. She had been filming a swarm of insects that had descended on their camp. "Delirium. They came at dusk," she whispered. The camera zoomed in on a cloud of what were clearly mosquitoes hovering outside the tent's transparent entrance. Millions of them, a black cloud. They are not insects. They are messengers. They carry the planet's plague. Each one is a needle filled with the world's poison, seeking our warmth. She recoiled as a few of the insects found their way inside the tent and landed on her arm. She didn't slap them away. She watched in horror as they pierced her suit. The suit is no protection. Their proboscises are fine enough to pass through the weave of the fabric. They are drinking my life. They are delivering their payload. The world spirit has sent its legion of angels to claim me. Her voice broke into a series of terrified, choked sobs. Mosquitoes, Elara said, her voice heavy, carrying malaria or dengue fever, West Nile virus, take your pick. She shook her head in disbelief. They saw a swarm of bugs and interpreted it as a sentient, coordinated attack. They've undergone a complete psychological collapse. They're being killed by biology, but they think they're being haunted. The final entries were fragmented and chaotic. The aliens reported that their food supplies were spoiling, being consumed by invisible creatures. Their water purifiers were failing, clogged with gelatinous slime. They saw every natural process of decay and competition as a personal, directed attack by a malevolent planetary consciousness. They had faced down predators and analyzed toxins with scientific rigor, but the relentless, grinding pressure of Earth's biosphere, the mold, the bacteria, the insects, the parasites, had broken their minds long before it broke their bodies. It was an enemy on too many fronts, an opponent that followed no rules of engagement they could understand. They come from a world where life is predictable, Edward mused, staring at the static on the screen where the last log had cut out. Probably sterile. Maybe they conquered their biology millennia ago. They live in clean environments, eat purified food, breathe filtered air. They came to Earth and stepped out of the hospital into the jungle. Every single thing was a threat. He pushed his glasses up his nose, his expression grim. They weren't just unprepared, they were fundamentally incompatible with life. After days of sifting through the corrupted data and fragmented personal logs of the dead, they found it. Buried under layers of encryption, flagged with the highest priority marker the alien language possessed, was the final report of the expedition commander. His name, as best as Edward could translate it, was Valor. Unlike the other logs, this wasn't a recording. It was a formal data burst, compiled in the last hours of the mission, intended for the ruling council of his home world. Edward isolated the file, his fingers tracing patterns on the holographic console. "This is it, Elara," he said, his voice hushed with anticipation. "This is the summary. This is what he told them." Elara stood beside him, her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the screen where the alien text was slowly being replaced by crisp, white English lettering. The commander's tone was not one of panic or despair, but of stark, terrifying clarity. He had finally connected the pieces. He finally understood. The High Council of the Vithar Dominion, from Commander Vlor, Expeditionary Survey Corps. Subject cancellation of Survey Mission Gamma 9. Urgent reclassification of Target Planet 3. Summary: the survey of the third planet in the Gamma 9 system is terminated. All surviving personnel are ordered to immediate emergency extraction. All collected data, while extensive, is secondary to the primary finding of this report. The initial classification of this world as a Class 4 garden world is catastrophically inaccurate. I have ordered a revised classification under emergency powers. This world is to be designated a Class 10 death world. Elara drew in a sharp breath. The classification system was hypothetical, something human xenologists had theorized but never seen. A Class 4 was a world ripe for colonization, rich in life but posing no significant threat. A Class 10 was a theoretical hellscape, a world where life was so predatory and hostile that it represented a threat on a galactic scale. The report continued. Justification. The indigenous life of this planet has evolved under pressures that are, by our understanding of biology, impossible. The competition is absolute and exists at every level of the ecosystem. Flora and fauna have developed offensive and defensive biological capabilities, toxins, venoms, hyper-aggressive physical weaponry that far exceed any recorded norms. My team has sustained 60% casualties from direct encounters with native life forms. However, this is not the primary threat. The true danger of this world is its microbial environment. The planet is saturated with trillions of unique, hyper-adaptive microorganisms that treat our biology as a raw resource. They are not pathogenic in the way we understand, they are consumptive. Our most advanced medical technologies are useless. Our immune systems are completely non-functional against them. These organisms have claimed the remainder of my crew. Hypothesis: the extreme nature of this biosphere has led to a singular evolutionary outcome. The planet's dominant sentient species, a bipedal primate that calls itself humanity, is not to be viewed as a potential partner or adversary in the conventional sense. They are, by necessity, a product of this lethal environment. One must assume that they are not merely living on this planet, they are an integral component of its lethally hostile ecosystem. Consider this. Their bodies must have evolved to not only withstand this constant multi-vector biological assault, but to incorporate it. Their immune systems must, by definition, be the most sophisticated and aggressive biological weapon we have ever encountered. Their psychology must be shaped by a world where death lurks behind every leaf, in every drop of water, in every breath of air. They do not live in a state of peace with their world. They live in a state of perpetual, total war, and they have been winning it since their species was born. Conclusion and warning. To engage this species would be an act of strategic insanity. We could sterilize their world from orbit, but we could never conquer it. We could never walk on its surface. Any ground invasion would be doomed to fail, not by the inhabitants' technology, but by the planet itself. An invisible, invincible army would destroy our soldiers from the inside out. Furthermore, any attempt to bring a human captive off-world for study would risk unleashing a biological apocalypse upon our own worlds. The plagues that they carry, to which they are immune, would annihilate our civilization. Therefore, my final recommendation is absolute. This world is a fortress. It is a biological citadel. The species that has risen from it must be considered the ultimate survivors in the known galaxy. Do not approach, do not contact, do not engage. Erase this system from our charts. Declare the entire sector a quarantine zone of the highest possible order. Our expedition is a failure, but it may have succeeded in one vital task. We have found hell, and we have learned to fear its children. The report ended. For a long time, the room was silent. Edward slowly sank into his chair, staring blankly at the text. Elara walked over to a small window that looked out from their subterranean lab onto a patch of scrub grass and a single hardy desert bush. "A Class 10 death world," she whispered, her voice filled with a strange mix of terror and awe. "He's talking about Earth. He's describing home." The final pieces of the puzzle were the visual logs from the evacuation. After Commander Vlor sent his dire warning, the mission's protocol shifted from survey to pure survival. The chaotic data fragments Edward's team had first witnessed now made horrifying sense. They were watching the last, desperate moments of the Vathar expedition on Earth. Elara brought the footage up on the main screen, stitching it together from the black box's surviving data packets. The primary viewpoint came from a pilot on the landing craft, his perspective shaky and panicked as he tried to coordinate the retreat. The scene was the same mold-infested ship from the engineer's log. Two surviving aliens, their silver suits stained and dented, were hauling equipment aboard, their movements frantic and inefficient. Outside, a torrential downpour lashed against the viewport, the acidic rain the engineer had feared. "Get it on board, now!" The pilot screamed in the Vathar language, his voice distorted with panic. "Forget the geological samples, just the data cores." One of the aliens outside slipped in the mud and fell, crying out as his hand plunged into a murky puddle. He scrambled back up, but his composure was shattered. "I am contaminated," he shrieked, looking at his muddy glove as if it were covered in acid. "The soil spirit has touched me." "There is no spirit, you fool! Get inside!" the pilot yelled back, but his own voice lacked conviction. He kept glancing nervously at the ship's internal sensors, which blinked with red warning lights. Life support failure. Air quality critical. Hull integrity compromised. The visual log switched to an external camera on the landing craft's hull. It showed the chaotic scene from a wider angle. The jungle clearing was a sea of mud. Expensive, sophisticated scientific equipment was being abandoned, sinking into the mire. A third alien, the xenobotanist from the tent, sprinted towards the ship, her arms flailing. She was not wearing her helmet. Her large teardrop-shaped head was exposed to the rain, and her face was a mask of pure terror. She had succumbed to the paranoia, believing the very air inside the ship was as poisoned as the air outside. As she ran, her foot snagged on a thick root hidden by the mud. She fell hard. The camera zoomed in. Her leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. A compound fracture, a sliver of white bone pierced the gray skin of her calf. It was a survivable injury, easily mendable with their technology. But here on Earth, it was a death sentence. She didn't try to get up. She simply lay in the mud, staring at the wound with wide, horrified eyes, as if she could already feel the microscopic horrors of the soil seeping into her body. The two aliens by the ramp hesitated, looking at her, then at the ship, a terrible choice on their faces. "Leave her," the pilot commanded from inside, his voice breaking. "We cannot wait. The engines are unstable." The two aliens turned their backs on their fallen comrade and scrambled up the ramp. It began to retract before they were fully inside. The pilot was taking no chances. The xenobotanist was left behind, her silent screams lost in the roar of the downpour and the whine of the ship's engines. The view switched back to the cockpit. The pilot's three-fingered hands flew across the controls. Alarms blared. The ship shuddered violently as it lifted off the ground, lurching sideways as a gust of wind caught it. The screen showed a view from the belly cam as they ascended, the abandoned clearing shrinking below, the form of the screaming woman in the mud disappearing into the green canopy. They broke through the churning clouds into the stratosphere. The planet below was a swirl of white and blue, beautiful and serene from this altitude. It looked nothing like the green hell they had just escaped. "Contact the orbital vessel," the pilot gasped, his breath ragged. "Tell them to prepare for an emergency jump. Scuttle this ship as soon as we are aboard. No quarantine, no decontamination. Just get us out." The final recording was from the bridge of the mothership, a larger vessel that had been waiting in high orbit. The viewpoint was a static security camera. The few surviving members of the landing party, perhaps half a dozen out of an initial crew of 30, were stumbling onto the bridge. They were gaunt, terrified. Their commander, Valor, stood waiting for them. He took one look at their faces, at the alien who had fallen in the mud clutching his hand, and made a decision. "To the escape pods," he ordered, his voice iron. "All of us. The ship's main reactor will be set to overload. We are not taking this vessel or anything it has touched with us." The last seconds of the log showed the crew scrambling for the escape pods. The final audio was Commander Valor's voice, broadcasting a single coded message to the home world. "Warning, warning, the death world is contagious." Then the feed cut out as the mothership, and the black box that had recorded its last moments was presumably destroyed. The recorder itself, built for survival, began its long, silent fall back to the planet that had so thoroughly broken its creators. Silence descended on the subterranean briefing room. The final log had ended. The story was complete. Edward and Elara stood before the main screen, which now displayed a comprehensive timeline of the Vathar expedition. It was a stark, brutal narrative of cascading failure. On the left side of the screen, a list of the Vathar crew members, each with their designation. On the right, their fate cross-referenced with Elara's data. Scout Cathar, cause of death, exsanguination and massive trauma. Culprit Panthera pardus, a leopard. Scout Lanier, cause of death, neurotoxic shock. Culprit Philibates terribilis, a golden poison frog. Technician Terrell, cause of death, necrotizing fasciitis. Culprit Streptococcus pyogenes, common bacteria. Pilot Nax, cause of death, primary amoebic meningoencephalitis. Culprit Naegleria fowleri, a waterborne amoeba. Xenobotanist Rael, cause of death, pulmonary edema. Culprit Aspergillus fumigatus, fungal spores. Mission Specialist Yule, cause of death, hemorrhagic fever. Culprit hantavirus, likely contracted from rodent droppings near a food store. The list went on and on. It was a litany of the mundane, a catalog of everyday dangers that humanity had learned to live with, mitigate, or treat. For the Thar, it had been an apocalypse. Edward slowly walked over to the timeline, his reflection a ghostly image on the vast screen. He reached out and touched the image of the leopard, its beautiful deadly form frozen in mid-pounce. Then he touched the microscopic image of the streptococcus bacteria, predator and plague. To the Thar, they were one and the same, agents of a world that was actively trying to kill them. "We live in a fortress," he said, his voice quiet, echoing the dead commander's words. "We just never saw the walls." Elara joined him at the screen. She pointed to the Vithar's initial planetary assessment. "Class 4 garden world," she read aloud. "Rich in resources, ripe for colonization, non-threatening." She let out a short, sharp laugh devoid of humor. "They scanned for technology, for energy signatures, for military capability. They never thought to scan for germs." She brought up an image of a bustling human city, New York, Tokyo, Lagos, people crowded together on streets, in subways, in markets, a vibrant, thriving mass of life. "Look at us," she said, her voice filled with a new, strange intensity. "We're living in a plague pit, a death trap, and we call it Tuesday. We shake hands, we kiss our children, we eat food grown in the dirt, we swim in the oceans. We are constantly exchanging, fighting, and co-opting the very microbes that annihilated them." Edward thought of the commander's final chilling hypothesis, that humanity was not just a species living on Earth, but a component of its lethality. "We were the ultimate survivors of the galaxy's most brutal boot camp. Our immune systems weren't just defenses, they were weapons forged in a billion-year arms race. Their greatest fear," Edward said, "was taking one of us off-world, a walking biological time bomb." He looked at Elara, the full implication of their discovery finally settling over him, a mantle of terrifying responsibility. "We're not the plucky underdogs of the galaxy, are we? We're not the newcomers destined to be crushed by ancient empires." "No," Elara replied, her gaze distant. "We're the monsters, the ones the other children in the galaxy have nightmares about." She gestured back to the list of the dead. "We're the reason you don't go into the dark woods at night. We're the reason you check for things under the bed. Except, in this story, the woods are our garden, and the thing under the bed is us." She turned off the main screen, and the timeline vanished. The only light left was the soft glow of a single small holographic display in the corner of the room. It showed a simple rotating globe of the Earth, blue oceans, green and brown continents, white swirls of cloud. It looked peaceful, benign, beautiful. They both stared at it, no longer seeing their home. They were seeing a fortress, a crucible, a weapon, and they were seeing themselves and all of humanity for what the rest of the universe would now see them as, its terrifying, battle-hardened children. The quiet hum of the lab's ventilation system suddenly sounded like the deep, sleeping breath of a slumbering giant. The report was condensed, sanitized of the raw horror, and encrypted with the highest security protocols in human history. It was transmitted not through public or military channels, but through a direct, hardline connection to a handful of individuals, presidents, prime ministers, generals, and a select council of scientists whose security clearance was so high it was practically mythical. The black box its story now told was sealed in a permanent stasis field and lowered into a vault bored 5 miles into the Earth's crust. Its existence was erased from all records. But the knowledge could not be erased. A week later, Edward and Elara found themselves in a place that technically didn't exist. It was a circular, subterranean chamber, the walls made of the same sound-dampening, sensor-proof material as the briefing room, but on a far grander scale. In the center was a large, round table. Seated around it were the 12 men and women who now carried the burden of the Vathar's discovery. They were the leaders of the newly and silently formed Planetary Defense Council. Edward and Elara were not seated. They stood to the side, observers, the oracles who had delivered the new gospel. An American general with a face like carved granite was speaking. "And so, all first contact protocols are hereby rescinded," the general said, his voice a low rumble. "The Arecibo protocol of broadcasting our existence is terminated. All deep space probes currently transmitting will be remotely scuttled. Our policy, effective immediately, is one of absolute total silence. We are not here. This solar system is empty. We will become a ghost." A woman with the sharp features and sharper intellect of a Russian physicist spoke next. Silence is not enough. It is a passive defense. The Vathar stumbled upon us by accident. Others could do the same. I propose the V-Lore Protocol. We must understand our advantage. We need to weaponize it. Weaponize it? A British diplomat asked, aghast. You are talking about weaponizing disease, biological warfare. I am talking about survival, the physicist countered, her voice ringing with cold passion. The Vathar commander was right. Our greatest defense is not our ships or our guns. It is our home. It is our own biology. We must catalog it. We must understand every lethal microbe, every toxin, every aggressive spore. We must create vaccines and antitoxins for ourselves, and we must understand how to deploy the raw, untamed elements against a non-terrestrial biology. The Earth itself is our strategic deterrent. Edward listened, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. He had unearthed a story of alien tragedy, and in doing so, had handed humanity its most terrible weapon. He glanced at Elara. Her face was a mask of professional neutrality, but he could see the conflict in her eyes. As a scientist, she understood the terrifying logic of the physicist's proposal. As a human, she felt the moral weight of it. The general nodded slowly. Project Chimera is approved. Dr. Vance, you will be its head. You will have unlimited resources. Your task is to turn your field exoecology inward. Catalog the arsenal of our planet. Give us a shield and give us a sword. Elara's posture straightened, a flicker of her military past resurfacing. She gave a single sharp nod. Understood, General. The general then turned his gaze to Edward. Dr. Edward, your role is no less critical. You will head the Echo Project. You understand their language, their psychology. You will work with our strategic teams to develop profiles to understand how other species might think. You will teach us how to recognize the Vathar's mistakes in others and how to exploit their sterile assumptions about the universe. You will be our master of psychological warfare. Edward felt his academic curiosity curdle into something much darker, much heavier. He had wanted to solve a puzzle. He had never intended to become a weaponsmith, but he looked around the table at the grim, determined faces of humanity's secret shepherds, and he knew there was no refusing. The universe was not the place of wonder he had imagined. It was a dark forest, filled with predators and prey. The Thar logs had just revealed that humanity, by some cosmic accident, was the most dangerous thing in it. To pretend otherwise, to cling to a naive sense of hope, would be the ultimate folly. Later, the meeting concluded. Edward and Elara stood alone in the empty chamber. The great round table was just a piece of furniture now. The weight of their new roles settled upon them. Project Chimera, Elara said softly, testing the name. They're asking me to bottle the apocalypse. And they're asking me to learn how to whisper nightmares into the minds of beings I've never met, Edward replied. He pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose, a familiar gesture that felt alien now, a relic from a simpler life. He looked at her, the only other person on the planet who truly understood the entire story, the fear and the awe, and the terrible, terrible power. The Thar called us the children of hell, he said. Elara met his gaze, her eyes clear and steady, reflecting a dawning, chilling acceptance. It's time we learned to live up to the family name.